What is going on, everybody? Hope everybody's enjoying their day so far. And we are back with another fantasy football live show. We're moving it to Tuesday night because tomorrow night we're going to be doing our weekly SEC talk show. So we are now into week number 9, week number 8 down, and we are definitely getting to the most crucial part of this fantasy football season. This is when you really need to make a run towards the fantasy football playoffs, whether you're under 500 or just hovering around 500. This is now the time to make some moves. With the trade deadline coming at the end of November, we're just a month away from the trade deadline. So definitely something to keep in mind of over the next couple of weeks to see if you need to make any moves to improve your team. You know, whether that's you need to get another elite quarterback or upgrade at any of the positions. We are definitely going to get into everything today, talking about our week 8 takeaways. We're going to be talking about most of the players who were the studs and duds. We'll also get into some news and injuries heading into week number 9. And as we always do here on the show, we will do our week 9 fantasy starts and sits. And then at the end of the show, we will look at our week 8 roster and our team to see how we did. We will see if we get back in the win column, actually continue our winning streak. Since we moved now to 4-3, we will see if we can move to 5-3 this week. But as I always remind you at the start of the show here, if you have any questions pertaining to starts and sits or trade questions, as we are now entering week number 9 of this NFL season, let me know down in the comments if you have any, and I'll get to it as soon as possible. So without further ado, let's go ahead and knock out the studs and duds. And also, if you missed it, I put out our waiver wire ads. The waiver wire will go into fruition overnight. We will also talk about the waiver wire in my league. But let's go ahead and get to our studs and duds. The quarterback stud of the week from this past week in the NFL is Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. And what a game it was for the Packers, as the Packers now have the number 1 seed in the NFC if the playoffs were to start today with a record of 5-1-1. With that one tie coming to the Dallas Cowboys, but dominant on Sunday night, 360 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Good enough for 28.3 fantasy points, and there's definitely a lot of weapons in this offense. You saw Tucker Kraft go off for 2 receiving touchdowns. You saw Christian Watson do really nice things in his return, and they also have some stars, Romeo Dobbs, and then also Matthew Golden. Then obviously we know what Josh Jacobs is doing in that backfield, but Jordan Love continues to be, it's not really a consistency that he's bringing you, but definitely an offense that is definitely viable enough for you to start him every single week, just based on the matchups. So Jordan Love is our quarterback stud. Now let's go on to our running back stud. Definitely a ton of options. Could have went with Jonathan Taylor, could have went with James Cook, but I wanted to go with Breece Hall because I feel like the Jets have gotten zero love this season, but the Jets ended up pulling out a 39-38 victory over the Bengals on Sunday afternoon. And Breece Hall has really only been like the bright spot for a really bad Jets offense. The Jets had their best performance of the season against the Bengals defense, has been giving up a lot of yards, both on the ground and through the receiving. But Hall on Sunday against the Bengals, 18 rushing attempts, 133 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, along with 2 receptions and 14 yards, Good enough in PPR formats, 33.86 fantasy points. So if you start him, if you're lucky to start Breece Hall this week, hopefully you did walk away with a victory. But Breece Hall is our RB stud of the week. Now let's go on to an interesting name here, which is going to be our wide receiver stud, and that's going to be Shamir Dyke of the Titans. All the talk, I feel like, in the start of the season was against Alec Amenor, but now Dyke has really started to become this wide receiver 1 for the Tennessee Titans. I know that nobody really wants to touch the Titans offense, but however, Dyke, we'll see if this consistency starts to linger over the next couple of weeks of the season. But 7 receptions, 93 yards, good enough for 23.4 fantasy points. And if we can get that every single week, especially like he gets these points, and like in PPR formats, that's what he gets there. But he didn't even get a touchdown. If he had got a touchdown, that would have been nearly a 30-point fantasy outing. So Dyke, maybe he can start to be that alpha wide receiver 1. Was especially the way that Calvin Ridley has been playing. He's been suffering an injury. And then the running back positions more becoming a committee with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, but Dyke is definitely a viable candidate, not only to pick up of the waiver wires, but to potentially start in your flex moving forward. So now let's go on to the tight end stud. We already talked about his QB and Jordan Love, and that's going to be Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers, and he absolutely performed well on National Tight End Day. When we had some duds like Jake Ferguson, George Kittle had himself a bounce back game after having 0 fantasy points last week. Tucker Kraft, now the number 2 all tight end in fantasy football this season. 7 receptions, 143 yards, 2 total touchdowns on the day. And we have been seeing this consistency from Tucker Kraft, 33.3 fantasy points. And if you can get that from your tight end, you will take that every single day of the week, especially if you have like a RB or a wide receiver not really producing his projected totals. When you have a guy, especially at the tight end position, putting up over 30 points, that is definitely a leap to have, especially when you're entering these fantasy playoffs, which are going to be coming over the next couple of weeks. But tight end stud is Tucker Kraft. So that's our studs of the week. Now let's go on to our duds of the week, and that is going to be Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was really a game where Tampa didn't really have to air it out. They were able to run the ball pretty effectively, both with Sean Tucker and Rachaad White. But Baker Mayfield, 152 passing yards. I'm not really too worried on that. The Buccaneers, though, are going on the bye week, so you won't see Tampa until week number 10. So just keep that in mind. If you have any Tampa players, you want to substitute them this week, because we will have some more bye weeks over the next couple of weeks. And the last bye weeks that you're going to see is in week number 14. That is the final weekend of the regular season before we get into the fantasy playoffs that start in week number 15. But only 4 fantasy points. I thought that this was going to be more of a blow-up game for Baker Mayfield. But, however, the Saints' rush defense was pretty bad at giving up over 200 rushing yards. So the Buccaneers didn't really have to do too much in the 23-3 win over the 1-7 Saints. So Baker Mayfield, not really too worried about that. He's really been one of the more consistent fantasy quarterbacks this season. Now let's go on to the RB dud. Now, if you have Bijan Robinson, you look at the matchup against the Miami Dolphins, you were really open for a blow-up game, to be honest with you. I know that I have Bijan Robinson in one of my leagues. I thought I was going to get 20-plus points, and we got a dud from him, let's be honest with you. I mean, the Miami Dolphins have given up so many rushing yards. I mean, you just look at what Quinshon Judkins just did against his defense. But Bijan Robinson, pretty of a lackluster performance from him and the Falcons. They got embarrassed at home against Miami. 9 rushing attempts, 25 rushing yards, 3 receptions, 23 yards. So Bijan Robinson, not only he's going to give you that production in the rushing game, but also the receiving game. Really, the receiving game really saved his performance. But if you don't play PPR, then he really had a bad day. As a PPR formats, he did have 5.8 fantasy points. I do expect a bounce back from Bijan Robinson. I know that this was supposed to be like the best matchup for him, but he's one of the more elite running backs this season. So Bijan Robinson, definitely a dud. Honestly, I would have won my week this week if Bijan Robinson did what Bijan Robinson did the past couple of weeks, but that's just how fantasy football has been going for me this season. Now let's go on to the wide receiver dud, Deebo Samuel. Now, I know that a lot of people are going to say, well, Marcus Mariota was the starting quarterback. What do you expect? However, though, with Terry McLaurin still being injured, with JCM struggling, Deebo Samuel didn't really do too much against a very tough matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. This matchup against the Chiefs just wasn't really close. The whole entire game, the Chiefs were able to do whatever they have been doing over the past couple of weeks, especially with Rashee Rice's return to that offense. But 3 receptions, 11 yards, 4.2 fantasy points. So definitely concerning for Deebo Samuel. To be honest with you, I don't know how much of a starter that he could be, especially if Jane Daniels doesn't suit up for the Commanders' offense. Now let's move on to the tight end dud of the week, Jake Ferguson. I honestly put some money on him to score a touchdown. I put a little parlay just for the national tight ends. We had Jake Ferguson, and Jake Ferguson didn't do anything. Yes, this is now the back-to-back week we had last week of George Kittle putting up a goose egg, and Jake Ferguson now putting up a goose egg. I wouldn't even think that Jake Ferguson would have done this remotely. I thought at least he would have the 1 reception. But come on, 0 receptions, 0 yards. But it was a pretty disappointing performance for the Dallas Cowboys, absolutely getting destroyed by the Denver Broncos. We will talk about a key injury for the Broncos when we talk about our news and injuries here coming up in a couple of minutes. But Jake Ferguson, 0 receptions, 0 yards, and 0 fantasy points. No, like I mentioned last week, that is not a typo. Unfortunately, if you did start Jake Ferguson, he didn't really provide you anything this week. However, some people might have gotten by those 0 fantasy points, and all the other key performers on their team might have given them the win. But like Baker Mayfield, like most of these duds, I'm not really too concerned about Jake Ferguson. Even with George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb being back and healthy on this team, Jake Ferguson has been really the prototypical guy that Dak Prescott has been looking to in the red zone. You've seen his touchdowns really tick up this season. So not really like too worried about Jake Ferguson. I definitely think that he's going to bounce back here in week number 9 because it can't get any worse from having 0 fantasy points in a game. It was a tough matchup against the Denver Broncos. Don't get me wrong here. But Jake Ferguson, I look for him to bounce back. So that is our studs and duds. Now let's go ahead, before we get into our week 9 fantasy football starts and sits, let's talk about some key news and injuries heading into week number 9 that you need to be really wary of when you're making these starts and sits decisions, and even some trade decisions coming up in the next couple of weeks leading up to the trade deadline. So Lamar Jackson, he is expected to play. I believe the Ravens do play on Thursday night, so just keep that in mind when you're setting your lineup here over the next couple of days. Looks like Lamar Jackson will be returning here in week number 9 for the Baltimore Ravens. That's definitely good news. If you have Derrick Henry definitely going to be boosted up with Lamar Jackson being up. Same with Zay Flowers. Even Mark Andrews is going to be boosted up. I know that Mark Andrews has been really up and down. But I definitely think that Lamar Jackson, if you start him, I mean, you definitely got to start him. But also, if you do have guys like Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, even if you have Mark Andrews, I could definitely trust him in my tight end position moving forward. We do have some trade news. The New England Patriots dealing a defensive end to the 49ers. Looks like Duggar is going to the Steelers. So just some trade news that's going on with the trade deadline in the NFL situated. I believe it's next week. It's the first weekend of November. So just keep, I believe it's actually the next week. Sorry about that. I think it's November 8th. It's around that line. But New Orleans Saints, they're going to be starting rookie quarterback Tyler Shuck against the Los Angeles Rams. Honestly, the only guy that I would want to start potentially is Chris Olave. Alvin Kamara, I wouldn't really start him. Rashid Shaheed, he's been more of a boom or bust this season. You really need a big catch from him to really get him going. Just some news for the Giants. Malik Neighbors had his surgery for his torn ACL, so that's good news, and he's going to be able to start his rehab. We will see how this affects him next season, because I don't think, definitely he's not going to be able to play at the start of the season, I would imagine. We will see. We'll have to monitor that over the next couple of weeks here. But really other injury news that we will get into, like I mentioned, looks like Carson Wentz will be out for the next couple of weeks. So J.J. McCarthy more than likely getting the start for the Minnesota Vikings. That definitely affects the like of both Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, as well as the receivers, Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and along with T.J. Hawkinson at the tight end position. So other, we already covered last week the Mike Evans injury, but you don't really have to worry about it that week. We will see with the Buccaneers, will we have Bucky Irving coming back in week number 10? He's been out for the past couple of weeks, so maybe with this bye week coming up, we will have Bucky Irving news in next week's show. We could cover that heading into week number 10. But I think that's pretty much all the injury news. Definitely keep up with the Jaden Daniels situation. The Commanders will be playing on Sunday night. But really outside of that, I really don't think that we have too many other major news or injuries here to get to. I'm just scrolling through ESPN here just to see. So Washington inactives, that was yesterday's game. Never mind on that. Like I mentioned, the Vikings are going to be placing Carson Wentz on the IR. Wentz will undergo season-ending surgery on his left shoulder. So J.J. McCarthy, the second-year player out of Michigan, will be the starting quarterback for the Vikings, I would have to assume here moving forward. And just to back off what Shefty is saying, looks like John Harbaugh expects Lamar Jackson, who has missed the past 3 games due to a hamstring injury, will play on Thursday night against Miami. And that is a blow-up matchup. I know that Miami just shut down Atlanta, but I think that Lamar Jackson, this Ravens team, is really going to try to make a push, not only to get a couple of wins just to get on a win streak, but get back in this playoff race as well. So that's just your news and injuries heading into week number 9. Definitely keep track on that. But before we get into the fantasy starts and sits, like I mentioned at the start of the show, if you have any questions pertaining to the starts and sits or trade questions, put them down in the comments, and I will get to it here throughout the duration of this show. So let's go ahead and get into the week 9 fantasy starts of this week, and that's going to be Sam Darnold of the Seattle Seahawks. Excuse me here. I got to take a second here. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. I had to get some water there. I was starting to lose my voice there for a little bit, but we're back. We're starting with the quarterback start of the week, Sam Darnold, that's of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I did have Sam Darnold on my waiver wire ads because I really like this matchup going up against the Washington Commanders. His defense have allowed the 12th most fantasy points to the quarterback position. And looking at their Monday night matchup, I know you're going to say Patrick Mahomes. Sam Darnold isn't no Patrick Mahomes. But we did see Mahomes. I know that he threw a couple of interceptions, but he was able to bounce back in the second half with 3 passing touchdowns. He really started off the game slowly. I was checking my ESPN fantasy football app, and he was only at 1.6 points heading into the first quarter, and he was able to turn it on. But the Seattle Seahawks, I know that Sam Darnold last time that we saw him on the field wasn't great, but it was a tough matchup against the Houston Texans that had really been stout against opposing quarterbacks. We're going through his projected total points, 17.5, passing touchdowns at 1.7, and the passing yardage is at 272.1. Sam Darnold, if you need him as a streaming option, I know that a lot of people probably won't start Sam Darnold because you probably have a better option here. But if you do need a streaming option, I definitely think that Sam Darnold would be one of the viable candidates for week number 9, as well as Joe Flacco, who's going to be our next starter for this quarterback position of the Cincinnati Bengals. And Joe Flacco has really been consistent. I know it was you can't really put much of a blame for Joe Flacco in this offense in the loss against a winless Jets team, because now he gets the Chicago Bears. This has been a defense that's definitely been gettable against opposing quarterbacks in fantasy. They have allowed the 5th most points to the quarterback position. And this Bengals offense, you see how Chase Brown has been performing over the last couple of weeks. The wide receivers as well have really been turning on here with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, even the tight end position with Noah Fant too. So Joe Flacco in this offense is starting to really get a rhythm. You saw it, how devastating it was to lose Joe Burrow. And then you have Jake Browning, who honestly didn't really do too great over his last couple of starts. But Joe Flacco, these are 2 streaming options. If you do have, especially on the waiver wire, if he's available, or if you have him on your bench, I would start both Joe Flacco and Sam Darnold. Definitely 2 quarterbacks that have some really nice matchups here in week number 9. Now let's go on to our running back, and that's going to be Kamani Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers. He has clearly taken over as the RB1. Really nice showing on Thursday night. I started him, was lucky enough to get 20-plus fantasy points from him. Matchup is about as good as you can get. Outside the Miami Dolphins against the Tennessee Titans, this defense have allowed the 2nd most points to the running back. So I am still riding with the hot hand of Kamani Vidal. Looking at his projected totals, 14.2 in the matchup against the Titans. Projected to get 73.6 rushing yards and rushing touchdowns is at 0.5. He gives you a little bit of receiving yardage too, which really helps you out in PPR format. So I think that this is going to be a game where, to be honest with you, I think that, the Titans are going to get really behind really quickly, and the Chargers are going to be comfortable to run the football. I know that Justin Herbert has had games where he's thrown over 400 passing yards, but I think that Kamani Vidal once again could really have a nice showing against the Titans defense that have struggled against opposing running backs. Now let's go on to Bam Knight. I did mention Bam Knight in our earlier video, hinting at our waiver wire ads. And like I mentioned on that video, really like this matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. The defense have allowed the fourth most points to running backs, and Bam Knight has really taken over as the RB1 here. You know, going through the injuries, James Conner's out for the season. Trey Benson probably won't be back till later in the season. But Bam Knight has really taken over this role. Really like this matchup, like I mentioned, against the Dallas Cowboys. It is on Monday night, so keep that in mind. But if you don't already have Bam Knight, go scoop him up on the waiver wire and plug him into your lineup, because this is definitely going to be a smash start from him. Just look at what the Denver Broncos rushing attack was able to do. J.K. Dobbins had over 100 yards rushing, and R.J. Harvey had one of his best games of his rookie career against this Cowboys defense. Now let's move on to the wide receivers. We're going to go to Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Now I know the Dolphins have been one of the more inconsistent offenses in all the NFL this season. But the matchup, once again, this is all about matchups when we're looking at the starts and sits. And that's against the Baltimore Ravens, a secondary that is still depleted. We'll see if they have any more of their key guys returning. But this defense, even with all that, have allowed the second most points to the wide receiver this season. And Jalen Waddle, we talked about Malik Washington as potential waiver wire ad, but Jalen Waddle, you saw him, what he did against the Atlanta Falcons, had a pretty nice game along with a touchdown. Could definitely see that as well, especially if Tua plays as well as he did on Sunday against the Atlanta Falcons. This could be a matchup where it's closer than you think, especially if Miami can really get this thing rolling on offense. So I'm definitely starting Jalen Waddle. This is on Thursday night, so keep that in mind when you're setting your lineups. So Jalen Waddle is one of our starts for our wide receiver position. Now we'll also go to Marvin Harrison Jr. I know a lot of people are already going to say, well, I don't want to start Marv this week because he's one of the more inconsistent wide receivers in all fantasy football. You see the sample size. Pretty much that's exactly what he did last year, and you see this year too. But we are expected to see Kyler Murray return from injury. And like I mentioned with Bam Knight, the matchup is as good as it's going to get. Wide receivers have feasted against the Dallas Cowboys. Just look at what Troy Franklin was able to do. Courtland Sutton also had a good game as well. He had 13 fantasy points in PPR formats. And this Cowboys defense have allowed 15 receiving touchdowns to the wide receivers. So, of course, Trey McBride is going to have a big game, but I would not be shocked at all if Marvin Harrison Jr. somehow finds the end zone. And looking at his projected points at 14.1, that receiving touchdowns at 0.5, I think I would definitely bet on Marvin Harrison Jr. to have really one of his best fantasy outings this season. He has come we thought that he was going to miss last game that we saw Arizona. He was going through the concussion protocol, ended up playing that one, but he's going to be back to full strength. And if he gets Kyler Murray back, that would only be better for this Arizona Cardinals offense. I know that a lot of people have worries on Kyler Murray, but Marvin Harrison Jr., one of the top starts this week in all of fantasy football. Now let's go on to the tight end position. This is more matchup based. I know Colson Loveland hasn't been the sexiest tight end in fantasy football this season, especially where you drafted him in the preseason. But the matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, really similar to what the Cowboys do against wide receivers. The Bengals have been atrocious against the tight end position. Mason Taylor had a really good game against this Bengals defense, and the Bengals have allowed 10 touchdowns to tight ends in 2025. So I know it was an okay performance for the Bears last week, but I do expect a bounce back from Chicago in this one, which could be a high-score matchup. So plug in Colson Loveland if you can into your lineups, as well as Rondé Gadsden, the Los Angeles Chargers tight end. And this is really just ride the hot hand. The Titans defense, like I mentioned, hasn't been great at all, but Rondé Gadsden has really panned out to really honestly be like the best waiver wire pickup. Could be that, especially if Rondé Gadsden continues this dominant stretch that he's been on for the past couple of weeks. He dominated on Thursday night, expecting to dominate once again against the Tennessee Titans. I wouldn't be surprised if he also finds the end zone once the Chargers get into the red zone. It's really been either Talad McConkey or Rondé Gadsden, so I'm starting Rondé Gadsden and riding the hot hand heading into week number 9. Now let's move on now to the sits of the week, and we will talk about the Denver Broncos first. Bo Nix, I know Bo Nix coming off of now back-to-back really good outings, had 25 points in the blowout against the Cowboys, and 2 weeks ago, 40-point outing against the New York Giants, and then epic comeback. It is one of the more tougher matchups. Quarterbacks against the Houston Texans is not a matchup that I really wanted to be involved in, as the Texans have allowed the fewest fantasy points to the quarterback. So it's really nothing against the Broncos or Bo Nix. It's just a really horrible matchup. So I know Bo Nix has been talented. After a slow start, he's really starting to pick it up here. But I just can't trust Bo Nix in a tough matchup against the Houston Texans. Now let's move on to the running back, Alvin Kamara, New Orleans Saints. Like I mentioned, with the Saints moving towards Tyler Shuck getting the start this week against the Rams, and the Rams defense have allowed just one touchdown to Arby's this season, and Kamara's production really hasn't been there. Even, in a blowout game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we saw a little bit of Devin Neal with Kendre Miller being out for the season, but Alvin Kamara, just can't really trust him this week against a tough matchup against the Los Angeles Rams. Now let's move on to the next wide receiver sit of the week, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. I know a lot of people are going to be too thrilled this. You're going to be like, well, didn't the Carolina Panthers just give up 40 points to the Buffalo Bills? Yes, I agree with that. But this defense limits receivers outside of the number one option. So you could say, well, Christian Watson is the number one option. That's just how you fare here. But I just think that there's got to be at least one wide receiver that's not going to have that great of a game, because the Panthers' defense in some games have been stout. So Christian Watson, I know that this is going to be a controversial sit of the week. I know that if you wanted to pick him up this week, especially, this is going to now be a second game back coming off of injury. I just, like I mentioned, the stat says it all down there at the bottom of your screen. So I would find another wide receiver this week to start. Now let's go on finally to the tight end sit, and that is going to be Hunter Henry of New England Patriots. As much as we like to talk about the pro matchups of the tight end, tight ends going up against Cincinnati Bengals, the opposite is with the Atlanta Falcons. As the Falcons have been really stout against this position. Is this a defense that have only allowed just 12 receptions to tight ends against this season? I know the Falcons coming off an embarrassing performance at home. I picked them up. I thought that they were a viable streaming candidate, and they absolutely fumbled this week against the Miami Dolphins. So I don't really expect that to continue. I think that this Falcons defense is really going to be motivated to have a bounce back game. And even with that, I know that Darren Waller now on the injured reserve, but the tight ends didn't really perform too well for Miami. I know Hunter Henry, he's been, really consistent down the stretch here, especially with the play of Drake May. But it is a tough matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, who have really been elite against the tight end position. So that is the starts and sits of the week. And as always, we do here to end out the show, we will be going now to, so here we go here. A dynasty question. Okay, so usually we get redrafts here. We do have a dynasty question. Would you send JCM plus Barner for an early 2026 second-round pick? I would definitely do that as well, because JCM's value might even go down last year, because who knows with the Commanders, maybe they draft another running back. So yes, I would definitely do this to get an early 2026 second-round pick, because I even think the rookies coming up in this draft class could definitely be a pick for that. So yes, I would make that move. Definitely excited to see a dynasty question. I always get these redraft questions. I haven't done a dynasty draft myself, but yes, I would definitely do this. The more draft picks you can get, the better. But let's go on now to our Week 8 matchup. We did end up pulling this one out, 115.88 to 65.9. It was pretty much over by Sunday night, a game as we now move to 5-3. Our opponent falls to 2-6. But as you can see, our opponent, I guess, doesn't really either care anymore about fantasy football, or they just didn't really check their lineup. However, we will take a win however we can get at this point. But quarterback matchup, Bo Nix, really thrilled with his performance against the Dallas Cowboys, 23.78. Kyler Murray was on the bye. Aston Gention's on the bye. We don't really have to focus too much on that. Look at Saquon having his best performance of the season against his former team in the Giants in the 30-20 win over the G-Men on Sunday. Saquon with 33.4. He had a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. So nice. He was our first-round pick. So nice to see him put up those type of numbers. Alvin Kamara continues to disappoint, only 6.5 fantasy points. Chuba Hubbard had 9.4. Looking at the wide receiver matchups, Tyreek Hill won't see in the rest of the season. CeeDee Lamb at 14.6 fantasy points. Looking at our wide receivers, we did have to start Romeo Doubs, who did put up 9.4 fantasy points. Emeka Egbuka in a game where Baker Mayfield only had 4 fantasy points. You see Egbuka get 6.5. Tight ends, McBride was on the bye week. Tyler Warren, 9.3 fantasy points. So his streak of finding the end zone ends there against the Tennessee Titans. Cam Scatterboot, RIP to our flex. That was a very devastating injury. So we will see if we could scoop up Tyrone Tracy on this week's waiver wires, as that will be the most popular waiver wire ad of the week. Ted McMillan, our opponent's flex, 16.9. McMillan, even in a blowout, did have a nice game against the Bills. Defense, like I mentioned, the Falcons, definitely the more disappointing defense of the week. Patriots continue to be one of the best defenses in fantasy football this season with 12 points. And the kicker, how about Chase McLaughlin putting up 17, the same with Tyler Loop at 13. So looking at what we could have done better, well, probably could have started Chase Brown. I think that we're definitely going to have to start Chase Brown now, unless we go with a double tight end stack of George Kittle and Tyler Warren there. But we did end up winning this one 115 to 65. Looking at the other ones, you had 104 to 64, 118 to 105. Look at this one, 51 to 43. Yeah, these are, I think, even both of them are now 2-6. And the matchup of the week that I really wanted to look at, the Birds is 8-0. They defeat Ben's best team. So Ben's best team now falling to 6-2. And this, look at the Birds team, like 26 start. He has JT and James Cook both going off this week. He had Tucker Kraft putting up 33. Yeah, the Birds honestly might run away with this. It's going to definitely be a tough out once we get to the fantasy playoffs. But we will go now on to the standings here just to see how where we are now shaping out with Ben's best team falling back here. So we are now only a game out of second place. The Birds in firm control of first place with an undefeated record of 8-0. Ben's best team is solidly in second place at 6-2. You do have 2 5-3 teams with myself, and I'm not even, I guess we'll just go with Mushrooms. And then MDR and Doge are at 5th and 6th with 4-4. And then you have a cluster of 2-6 teams rounding out. Playoff percentage chances did go up 69%. So looking at the projected playoff bracket, if the season were to end today, let's see where we would be. We would be in the playoffs as a number 3 team, as a number 3 seed. Looks like these playoffs are 2 weeks, so that would actually start week 14 and 15, with the championship being on 16 and 17. So now let's go on back to my team. The waiver wire hasn't really set. Usually we do this show on Wednesday night. I like to go over what happened, but we can put in our waiver claims now. So we do have a couple of buys, and yikes, these are 2 big blows to our roster so far. And we have Cam Scatterboot on the IR, which I will move him right now. So let's see. Actually, let's see if we can manage our IR here. Let's go ahead and manage the IR. All right. Cam Scatterboot, you were nice to us. Unfortunately, you have to go on the IR. Okay. All right. So we do have a couple of open roster spots, which we could do that. I am kicking the Falcons defense to the curb. I believe this is one of my leagues where I have the Seahawks defense, which I'm going to firmly put them back into the starting lineup. For week number 9, we do have a tough matchup once again. So let's go ahead and make some moves here. The Falcons, you are going to be – can I just drop this team for honestly? I don't trust them. Let's go ahead and drop the Falcons. We will move the Seahawks back into our starting well, we do need another kicker, which sucks because Chase McLaughlin has really been doing good things for us here over the last couple of weeks. But looking at the quarterbacks, we have Jared Goff versus Bo Nix. Like I mentioned, don't really want to start Bo Nix here. So I think we are going to be starting Jared Goff against the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, look what the Vikings defense just did on Thursday night against the excuse me here. Let me go. Give me one second. All right, I'm back here. Sorry, I had to take another swig of water there. But I think looking at the quarterbacks, we could definitely see what our options are outside of Jared Goff at the waiver wires. But I think that Jared Goff is definitely going to be our best option. Like I mentioned, Bo Nix going up against what supposedly is the number one defense against quarterbacks in the Houston Texans. But let's look outside of that. So Mike Ibuka, let's go ahead and replace him with Jackson Smith and Jigba. We will also replace Romeo Dobbs with Brian Thomas, and Brian Thomas does play. We will have to monitor that, but that's a really nice matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. I do expect Brian Thomas to bounce back if he does, return to the field for the Jags. It was an embarrassing performance for the Jags last time we saw him in London. I do expect a bounce back for the Jags. I guess now we could just go with George Kittle in our flex. We will have to see what our waiver wire options. I know that I said that I wanted to bench Alvin Kamara, but if we don't get like Tyrone Tracy or any of those guys, we might have to pivot. So we do have 2 open roster spots, so let's go ahead and take care of that. Let's go ahead and see what our waiver wire options. Let's see what the quarterbacks are first. We might want to go pick up a quarterback, but not going to be really too hesitant on that. I do feel like, maybe Jordan Love against the Carolina Panthers. But let's go to our running back options, see if Tyrone Tracy is available. Looks like he is not. So we are pretty thin at our running back options here. I was hoping that let's go ahead and claim Bam Knight here. If we do get Bam Knight, that's definitely going to be a plug and play for me, especially with Saquon Barkley on the bye week. So that's one. We do need to get a kicker, though. I think I'm just going to drop Chase McLaughlin for another kicker. So let's go ahead and do that next, and we'll get one more player because we do need one more bench spot. Maybe we get another receiver just to see just to build some depth, especially with Cam Scatterboo being out. I know he's a running back, but let's go ahead and go get another kicker here. So let's go ahead and look at our kicker options just to see what we could scoop up here with Chase McLaughlin being on the bye week. So, Will Lutz, Matt Gay, Matt Prater. You know what? We're going back to our guy in Kaimi Fairbairn going up against the Denver Broncos. We're just going to be hoping for a field goal fest, at least on one side here. So I think looks like can we drop? Guess we let's see. Let's go to our kicker. Where's our kicker at? Oh, there we go. Chase McLaughlin, I am sorry. We're going to have to drop you, at least for this week. We will see if we go back to him. If you were on this, listening to the show here the past couple of weeks, we did have Kaimi Fairbairn. We did have to drop him, though. He was on the bye week. So it looks like he's going to be back on the team here if that claim goes through. Let's go and get one more claim. We do have one more roster spot to fill, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to the wide receivers. Tight ends, we're pretty set with George Kittle and Tyler Warren. So the receiver options, we could go with Jameson Williams, get a flyer there. Travis Hunter, Hollywood Brown. Let's go with Troy Franklin. He's really been consistent wide receiver for us, especially since we have Bo Nix. I know that we're not starting Bo Nix, but having Troy Franklin as that potential stack with Bo Nix could really pay dividends over the next couple of weeks. So right now, we would have Jared Goff as our starting quarterback, Chase Brown, Alvin Kamara as our starting running backs. I know Alvin Kamara. If I can get one of these running backs, I'm probably starting him over Kamara this week. Don't really trust AK to really do too much, especially with Tyler Shuck getting the start. And then wide receivers is going to be Brian Thomas and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And right now, we're going to go with a double tight end strategy with Tyler Warren and George Kittle. We do have the Seahawks returning to the defense. And once we get a kicker, we're hoping that it's going to be Kaimi Fairbairn. Let's go ahead and look at the matchup to see, because this is a big one. Ben's best team is 6-2. We're 5-3. So if we were to win this matchup, we would actually go to second place, depending on how many points that we do score in this matchup. So this is a big one, both for playoff implications and to potentially get to that number 2 seed, which honestly doesn't really matter. You don't get a bye. However, let's just look at the matchup. So it looks like not really dealing anything with bye weeks on his side outside of the Buccaneers defense. But this is a full force team that we're going against. Obviously, we do have some key bye weeks, especially, and then obviously with Cam Scatterboo going on injured reserve. So I would have to give the edge to our opponent here. We will see how it breaks down if we get some of these top running back ads, if we get Bam Knight, or if we get our wide receiver ad with Troy Franklin. But right now we are projected to lose there. but we will see how this shakes out. But like I mentioned, we are dealing with a couple of key bye weeks there. So we are fortunate to go to 5-3. That's definitely good news. And that's going to be it for tonight's live show. We will be back next Tuesday, since SEC Talk will be rolling on Wednesday night only this week, but also next week. So I do appreciate everybody for tuning in. Appreciate everybody for all your comments tonight. And we will be back next week, and obviously keep track of all of our content during the week, as we will have the latest on college football news, especially with SEC football. And we'll also have our college football show, with the top games for Friday and Saturday. So keep tuned on that. I appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight's show, and I will see you all next time.